what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
For organizations looking to enhance their customer relationships, this is Stepping Up Service. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stepping Up Service here on themesh.tv. My name is Alan Jackson. I'm with the Jackson Group, a consulting and survey services firm located in North Carolina. And with me, as always, is Ed Gagnon with Customer Service Solutions, a firm working on helping organizations manage their customer service experience and culture with a wide variety of clients. Ed, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Alan?
Doing just fine, just fine. Glad to have you here again, as always. This is our show, Stepping Up Service, where we talk about the concepts and ideas behind having a really strong customer service culture in your organization. It can be things where how to better treat customers and how to care for them more directly, how to respond to their needs better. But it also can talk about even internally in an organization, working with your coworkers, creating just that overall organization culture of service and how to help improve that. Just a couple of things before we get into today's topic, which, Ed, is going to be a neat one because we're going to talk really just about one word. Is that right? I mean, we're talking about one word, and that word is rudeness.
Rudeness, exactly.
Yeah, so we're going to dig into what is rudeness, what do people mean when they say somebody was rude, and then more importantly, what can we do about that perception? And we got some interesting thoughts to share on that in a moment. But before we do, just as a reminder, this podcast is a part of the Mesh.tv network, where you can go online to themesh.tv. You can see a whole wide variety of shows and pull up and listen to any old episode of any of those shows as well. We really do encourage you, if you like this show or any of the other shows on the network, to please use the subscribe button, especially if you're using a software tool like iTunes. You can go in and subscribe to the show, and that way you ensure that every time we put out a new episode, it gets delivered right to your device of choice, ready for you to listen to on your next commute or as you're running or whatever it may be. So that's the mesh.tv. Check it out and give us some feedback. We'd love to hear from you. All right, so Ed, what I want to do a little bit today is talk about this word rudeness. And, you shot me this idea mainly through your website blog post where you have rudeness is an issue. And yes, here's what's to do about it. And it got me thinking about this word rudeness. And I kind of have a little bit of a strange relationship with this word, Ed, personally, because to me, rude is such a broad, vague term.
Yes.
You know, I can almost think of 12 different actions that would fall underneath the word rude when somebody says rude. So when I get feedback that somebody was rude, and I did kind of have to deal with a situation just in the last few weeks from a work standpoint where I'm not going to go into too much details on it for the people involved, but the word rude was used to describe somebody that an interaction was being held with. And it got me thinking about it. It's like, that is such a broad term that I don't really know where to go with that, because I think everybody might have a little bit of a slight different definition of what they consider to be rude. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious. I read your blog post. I thought it was interesting how important this conception of being rude and how much of an impact this has on service. Tell us about this word. What is it about this word that's so important to customer service?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting question because rudeness, to some extent, can be in the eye of the beholder. Yeah. If you think about millennials nowadays, if we want to stereotype a full group of young people, sometimes a lot of millennials can be perceived as rude because they're walking around with their eyes at their smartphone, and they're on the elevator and they're not making eye contact, and they're looking at their phone, or they're talking to somebody, and to them that might not be rude. That might be they're communicating with their friend. Mm-hmm. They're just doing it in the presence of others. But to a lot of people who grew up with the eye contact, with the focus on the other individual, with giving some space to the folks around you and not bringing your personal conversations into their space, it can be perceived as rude. So rudeness can mean different things to different people. We actually have a company that we worked with years ago, and they did a study on rudeness. And in doing this study, they identified a lot of different characteristics of engagement in business that people consider to be rude. And it wasn't just one behavior is considered rude by 99% of the people. Different people had different definitions for rude. And just to kind of give you a real quick example, there were people who, when you were on the phone, if you left them a voicemail and they didn't return it, they would perceive you, the person who did not return the call, as being rude.
Wow. Okay.
So non-responsiveness. you're on the phone, you're put on hold by an employee for a long period of time, some people perceive you as being rude.
Yeah.
You have to go through voicemail mazes. You can't directly get to somebody, so you're perceived as rude. So those are just three quick examples that relate to telephone rudeness, where when you're engaging a business, certain things that might have a very logical reason why they're on hold or why the voicemail system exists, in the perception of the customer, the eyes of the customer, you can come off as being rude.
Wow. So the idea of non-responsiveness, or maybe not responding in the manner in which the person was expecting,
yes,
is kind of as I think about it, yes, I could see that being a wide number of cases where people would use the word rude for an encounter that they had. Huh.
Right. And just to give you another example that ties into what you're saying, by not responding to that email or that voicemail, that doesn't mean you're not working on whatever that need is or issue is. It doesn't mean that you don't care about that customer, but the fact that there wasn't a response, there wasn't a communication back, there wasn't a reciprocation, can make somebody come off as rude.
Yeah.
One of the big drivers of the perception of rudeness in business is a perception of indifference or inattentiveness or a don't care attitude. Now, none of those things convey that the employee doesn't care, but if the employee with their body language, their tone of voice, how quickly they respond doesn't convey that they care, then that lack of caring by many people can be perceived as rudeness.
So, Ed, if we hear this word rude getting batted around a lot, and we kind of maybe understand what are some of the key driving factors for somebody using that word, in the grand scheme of things with customer service and interactions with customers or coworkers or anything else, I mean, how important is this concept of rudeness? I mean, where does it rate? Where does it fall in the grand scheme of things as far as how people perceive the customer service they get from somebody?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the rudeness, whether it is the indifference that I'm talking about or the unreturned phone calls, or the more obvious rudeness, like you take a negative tone, you have rude language, or interrupting people, regardless of how people are defining rude, the stereotypical or the more indifferent and non-responsive, studies have shown that if people feel like they've received rude behavior from a business, anywhere from 55 to 60% of those folks will go out of their way to get the same product with a competitor. Yep. So you can drive away 50+% of your customers if they perceive you're being rude. So there is that financial piece. If you want to start by looking at it from the company's perspective, rudeness can cost businesses money. A second way to look at it applies to the business and applies to the person, and that is time. If people truly feel like they're being treated rudely, they are going to reach out to that company. They might write a letter, they might send the email, they might document it. And now all of a sudden, the company's having to spend time on service recovery. They're having to spend time resolving the issue. The employee is brought into it, and they're having meetings and calls with the customer to address this particular issue. So the second way can really impact a business, but also impact the employee, is time. You're wasting your own time because that interaction was perceived as being rude. And the third and final one, just to touch on briefly, is more specific to the individual employee. If the manager or the supervisor hears that you're being perceived as rude, then you're putting yourself at risk professionally.
Sure.
We don't want an employee that's wasting our time by having to field complaints about them. We don't want an employee that is costing us money financially as well.
Ed, is it safe to say, and maybe I'm going out on a limb and here making kind of a wild assumption, but is it safe for me to say that there's a really high likelihood or high chance that what people perceive as rude was in most cases not intended to be rude by the person that exhibited that behavior?
Yes, especially in business.
Okay. All right. Yes. So in other words, we're not saying that when somebody says that the experience they had, the person they encountered was rude, more likely than not in a business situation, the person that was delivering that had no intentions of trying to come across in any of the faintest way as being rude. It was all in a style or tone or action they took that was perceived by the person on the other end, not to their liking. Therefore, it was a rude experience.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's a great point, because rudeness, especially in business, is not something that employees or businesses intend to do.
Right.
Because they have this inherent understanding, if I'm rude to this individual, it's going to come back to bite me. They're going to call my supervisor. If we're rude to this customer, they're not going to come back. So very rarely in business do the employees, to the organizations intend to be rude. But if it is not something that is considered when you're training employees, when you're hiring employees, when you're designing your processes and systems, then you could actually build a perception of rudeness into how you're doing your day-to-day work and therefore get all the negative feedback and consequences from it.
Wow. Okay. So if rudeness is something that's not intentional, or at least the perception of it, typically yes. Not something intentional, it is all based, like you said early on, it's the eye of the beholder to some degree. It's what you perceive personally to be rude to you.
Yes.
And a lot of it has to do with lack of follow-up, lack of communication, or feeling like it's too difficult to get the kind of response you're looking for.
Yes.
That's a pretty typical rationale for why people would use the word rude.
Exactly.
So then it really just becomes a matter of taking a look at how we exhibit and display ourselves to make sure that we're countering that idea of rudeness with people.
Exactly. So the typical person, the employee in business or the business themselves, if they truly do care about what they do, they truly do care about serving the customer, and they are just somebody who is not naturally effusive, not naturally very friendly, not naturally exceptionally helpful, not naturally very responsive, then they run the risk of being considered, being perceived as being rude. So they have to be much more intentional about how do I interact with folks, how do I communicate with them? How quickly do I communicate with them? How do I end those conversations with those customers so when they walk away, they perceive I care, they perceive I'm interested and engaged. They don't perceive that I'm rude.
So I guess one challenge for companies hiring individuals, especially hiring individuals that are going to be playing key customer service roles with the organization,
yes,
is that you may have somebody that you're interviewing that has all the right proficient technical skills, and you may know is a very good person, good-hearted person, means well, but you have to pay attention to how that person is going to come across to people.
Yes.
And I would assume, I mean, that's a little bit of a touchy subject because you're talking about basically somebody's outward personality versus how they truly are inside.
Yes.
And but it is something we have to keep in mind is that rudeness is a big factor in why people choose or choose not to use a company like our own. And
yes.
We can't take too many chances with having employees that may be great employees, but if we're giving off the sense of being rude, even though they have no intentions of it, and it's a hard thing to fix, that becomes a real problem.
Yes, and there's the overt examples that we mentioned earlier. It's the rough language, for example. But when you're in the interviewing or in the hiring process, things that you can look at for the perception of rudeness. Well, first of all, as an employee, as a hiring employee, you can tell if you feel like somebody's treating you rudely. Mm-hmm. But specific things to look for are prospective employees who are interrupting you.
Okay.
Prospective employees who are not being patient. Prospective employees who are trying to get to their point, get to their question, seek to be heard prior to seeking to understand, seeking to listen, those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. You're looking for employees who are not responsive to you unless they have a particular need. So you're looking for a lot of these symptoms of problems that could be perceived as rudeness in the eyes of the customer. Mm-hmm. Look for them. Look for patience instead of impatience. Look for people who are willing to listen instead of those that interrupt because they have the next word to say. Look for those kind of characteristics in the folks that you're interviewing or hiring so that you don't have to work as hard in training them on the type of communication skills and attitudes that they need to make sure they don't come across as being rude.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, how about let's do this, Ed, if it's okay with you, if we take a quick little break. How about when we come back, maybe let's talk a little bit about some tactics or ideas of ways that people can help fight that rude perception, especially if they feel like that they maybe are exhibiting some of the things or may have a tendency to exhibit things that people could be perceiving as rude. How do we keep that in check? What are some helpful tips to remember? Does that sound okay? Come back and we'll do
great.
that. Good.
Yes.
Well, let's take a quick little break. We'll come back in a moment as we're talking about this concept of rudeness. How we identified it. We understand kind of what the perceptions behind it are and the importance to the customer service experience. Now we want to move in the next part of the show into some tactics to helping alleviate that perception of rudeness for yourself or people in your organization. This is Stepping Up Service on themesh.tv, and we'll be back in just a moment. Hi, Alan and Chris here with an exciting announcement about something coming to the Western North Carolina area later this year. It's the first ever Foot Candle Film Festival.
That's right, an honest-to-goodness film festival that's happening September 25th through the 27th at the Salt Block in Hickory, North Carolina. Films are being submitted from all over the world to be considered.
Do you or someone you know have a film that you'd like to submit? Visit footcandle.org and follow the link to the festival for instructions.
Stay tuned later in the year as we announce our choices and start selling tickets.
Visit footcandle.org for more information. We'll see you in September. Welcome back to Stepping Up Service here on themesh.tv. I'm Alan Jackson with the Jackson Group. With me is Ed Gagnon with Customer Service Solutions. Before we go on, just as a reminder, Customer Service Solutions, I'm a big fan of Ed's company. I think you guys all know that from listening to the show. And we've had a pleasure of working with him on many occasions. And they do a great job of working with organizations and really going in and finding out how to help elevate and enhance or even just create a structure that's designed for good customer service. And working with the culture of the organization, working with processes, a lot of great work that being done by Customer Service Solutions. You can learn more about them at cssamerica.com. That's the website, cssamerica, all one word, .com. And sign up for the free newsletters that come out and the blog posts that come out from the website. It's some really good information. And a lot of those blog posts are kind of the starting point for some of our podcast discussions we've had in recent months. So definitely encourage you to do that. Ed, we're jumping back into this concept of rudeness. And we talked about in the first half of the show kind of what is meant when people use the word rude, saying, well, that person was really rude to me when I interacted with them. What does that mean? What are some of the driving factors behind it? And, of course, the importance of it is so critically important to retaining customers or attracting new ones. It just doesn't work if they feel like the word rudeness is somewhere in their description of your organization. Mm-hmm. So knowing that, all right, let's say you've got yourself or you got a coworker and, maybe they've been called rude before and they have still not quite sure why. It's one of those things. They're nice people. They mean well. They really want to try to help the customer, but they're just being told they were rude. So can you share with me some tactics or things that maybe we can all be remembering to constantly be fighting against anybody having that perception of us?
Sure. Why don't we go through about a half a dozen quick tips to get at this perception of rudeness and how do we overcome being perceived that way. The first is watch your subtle tone issues. So this is about tone.
All right.
So, avoid the huffs and the sighs and it's, it's like, oh, it's Alan again. Great. Another,
wait a minute. People do that every single time I talk to them. So what is that saying about
they're being rude.
They're being rude.
I'm glad you don't take it personally. Some customers might.
Yeah.
But those types of things, the subtle tone issues. Maybe you have a booming voice and it's, Alan, come on. What exactly are you looking for here? I mean, you could say, Alan, help me understand what you're looking for here. But that booming voice seems very aggressive, seems rude and pushy and that sort of thing. So the first thing you want to do is just think about the tone, the huffs, the sighs, the long delays, the ums when you're trying to explain something that convey that you're distracted, the booming voice. Just watch some of those subtle and maybe sometimes not so subtle tone issues.
So maybe it's a situation where if somebody, it's sometimes hard to self-diagnose yourself and say whether or not I have a loud booming voice or whether or not I use ums a lot. Would it be possible to try to, you got a spouse, you got a best friend, you got somebody that maybe you can kind of get some feedback from and say, hey, I'm trying to work on these tones. Can you give me some feedback on how this is sounding? Or maybe try to practice a little bit on it. I mean, I know it sounds a little elementary, but I think that's the kind of things you got to do if you're not able to really always listen to yourself very carefully.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Definitely. If you can find some folks that you can do a little role play with, just ask for feedback from, do some practice with. One other thing you can do is when you're talking to somebody on the phone, if you have a recorder on your smartphone or elsewhere, just record yourself. You wouldn't be recording the person you're talking with. Mm-hmm. I mean, in some states you can't do that. But you can always just record yourself. And because what you're trying to do is gauge your own tone of voice and how you're coming across. And are you coming across flat, like you don't care? Are you constantly huffing and sighing and puffing? Do Do you sound like you have that domineering voice? Do you perceive that you're interrupting the other person? So you can literally just record your half of the conversation and see how your voice might come across.
No, that's great. Because, again, we've lived with our voice our whole life. And it's really hard to step away sometimes and say, I do think I have a loud, booming voice. Or, yes, I do think I sound more forceful when I talk. So you really need that perception of others. And unfortunately, I'm sure that's a tough thing to fix or to break the habit of your speech patterns. But we are just trying to help everybody understand that, if you're in a job where you have to depend on customers and business success and all that, these are things that do have a role in it.
Yes, and awareness is the first step to making any kind of improvement.
Sure.
And if you can do some of these role plays, do some of this recording to get some of that awareness, then that's the first step.
Okay, all right.
The second tip is avoid using the word you if discussing blame. I mean, there could be an issue, and I could say, well, sir, what we need to do here is address A, B, and C, because when this particular third step goes before the second step, that could cause a particular problem. That might not be perceived as rude. You're educating or explaining why. But if you say, oh, you know why you're in this fix? It's because you did step 3 before you did step 2.
Right.
If you wouldn't have done step 3 first, you wouldn't be dealing with this. Now, again, you're explaining the same thing, but which of those two examples comes off more rudely?
Oh, absolutely. The second one. I mean, it's just,
definitely.
The first one may it sound like that this might be a common problem that typically people may face, and it's okay because I'm here to tell you how to make sure it doesn't happen again. The second one sounded like, I'm a boneheaded guy who just made some dumb mistakes, and this guy's letting me know about it,
Yes.
Yeah.
And so they feel bad about themselves. They get emotional. They get upset, and they're projecting that on you at that point. And now you find yourself dealing with the irate, the upset customer who thinks you're rude on top of the issue that they have in the first place. So avoid using the word you if discussing blame.
That's great. It's a simple thing to remember, but it does take some practice, I'm sure. Again, that self-listening on some situations would probably be very helpful.
Sure. The third tip, we talked a little bit about it the last podcast. We talk about periodically because it's such an important characteristic of somebody who's great at customer service, but convey some empathy. Oftentimes when you're in the customer service role, you're having to deliver information people don't want to hear. And you can say something like, that's against policy. Mm-hmm. Okay, that might be true, but is that really helpful? And it almost sounds rude. What you want is against policy. That's against policy. You can say, unfortunately, we're not able to do that for this particular reason, but what can we do for you?
Sure.
So you're being understanding. You have the unfortunately in there. I know this might be frustrating. I'm sorry we can't do it for this reason, but let's see what we can do for you. In the second case, it was much more positive, empathetic, and forward-looking. In the first case, where you just say that's against policy, they could think this person isn't helpful. They're just shutting the door on me. They're being rude, maybe being argumentative, maybe not being the least bit flexible, and they could perceive you as being rude.
And Ed, I think it's a really important point. You mentioned this earlier in that last discussion there. To kind of re-stress again for people, because I hear this a lot. Even the example you gave of that's against policy. I've dealt with a lot of organizations where people are in positions where they have to enforce rules. They have to enforce structure. They have to tell you whether something is within a certain code or not a code. And, a lot of responses I get from people when I talk to them about this idea of empathy or showing more customer service nature towards people, it's like, well, but it's the facts. I mean, what they're trying to do is not allowed. What they're trying to do is not within the policy. So I'm not telling them anything that's false. I'm not lying to them. I'm not making something worse than it is. I'm telling them the truth. But I think what you said is just so important. I mean, we can say the exact same message in a completely different structured way, still be exactly doing our job and specifying the rules and not letting people get past the rules, but couching it in a way that shows that we understand and we're going to try to work and help them to get down a different path.
Yes, because it's true, but is it helpful?
Yeah.
It might be true, but are you saying it in such a way that you're engendering negative feelings, or are you saying it in such a way that you're trying to form a partnership on moving toward a potential solution?
I love that phrase. Building a partnership toward another solution as opposed to just being the roadblock.
Exactly.
And, I think that's great. And you're right. That is, I can definitely see people saying that person was rude because of the way
Yes.
they told me that message. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The fourth point, very, very tactical, but it's effectively move the customer to the hold or the transfer. So this is really, really tactical. But think about when you've ever called an organization and either because they have somebody else on the line or they have to research something for you, they put you on hold. Or maybe they're not the right person to answer your question, so they have to transfer you. We have done literally thousands and thousands of mystery shops over the years. And with some of the telephone mystery shops that we've done, you'll have people who will, when they have to put somebody on hold or transfer them, they will very appropriately say, Mr. Smith, I'm not the best person to answer this question for you, but I know who is. Is it okay if I connect you with Miss Jones? This is her number. She's definitely somebody who can help you the best with this. That's professional.
Yes.
What we get oftentimes is, hello, can I talk to Mr. Smith? Or can I talk to somebody about this issue I'm having with my product? All of a sudden, the customer hears click, ring, 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 and then the call is going.
Yeah.
And then it shows up at the other person, and they end up answering the phone, and you have to tell your whole story again. And that can be perceived as rude. You didn't tell me what you were doing. You didn't tell me why you were doing it. You didn't tell me to whom you're doing it. And now I'm having to repeat my story over again. So it's something as simple as that. How the hold, how the transfer is done can create a perception of rudeness.
Well, and just to expand on that, absolutely, like you said, transferring somebody just automatically without saying a word, that's the worst. The second worst is just saying the words "hold, please," and immediately putting me on hold. So in other words, you're not really telling me what's going to happen or asking my permission. It's just kind of that's your phrase to make it sound more warm and inviting, to say "hold, please." Yes. But normally it's said so quickly and so abruptly right before I go to hold, I don't really have a chance to respond anyway. So,
right.
It's definitely, I can think of the companies already in my head, even from the last few weeks that I've called, and you can tell a difference right away the minute they say, I'd like to put you on hold if that's okay with you and transfer you to someone who can help you better. Is that okay to put you on hold for a few minutes? I mean, I love that because you're walking me through exactly what you're going to do. I had an opportunity to say no if I didn't want you to do that. And that's really great.
Yeah, and that way it does give that opportunity for a little bit more dialogue. It does give the customer the opportunity to say, unfortunately I can't, or I've already talked to this person, or whatever the case might be. It can save the customer some headaches. And the more headaches we save the customer, the more headaches we're saving the company down the road as well.
All right, good. That's really important. You're right. It's a very tactical one. It's something that can be scripted. It's something that can be easily trained. It's just, I agree, it does make a big, big difference. So very good. Yeah.
Well, we started with tone of voice. Our fifth one is body language. Tone of voice and body language seem to always touch on those together. So what we're going to do here, Alan, is I'm going to give you some examples of body language or expressions. And I know this is radio, this is podcast. So I'm
not exactly the best format for demonstrating body language, but we're going to do our best to do it over the airways here. So
so I'll do it, and you just describe what I'm doing, maybe how it makes you feel, that kind of thing. You ready?
Right. I'm going to be doing a play-by-play of Mr. Ed Gagno's body language at this moment. Okay, please proceed. All right. Ed is he is kind of rolling his eyes back in the back of his head. He just kind of stroked his chin, kind of out of a little bit of a desperation move. Now he's slightly shrugging the shoulders and folding them while he's looking away like he just doesn't have a care in the world. And now he's pointing at me. So pointing at me, not at him, pointing at me. Okay, good. I think I got a gist of what we're doing here with the body language. Yeah, we're good.
So how did you feel about it?
I didn't feel very good at all. Actually, I felt, even though I know this is a role-playing thing and you're just pretending, I actually felt a little upset there for a moment. So it's like, why is he rolling his eyes? Why is he shaking his head? They were also subtle, though. That's the thing. I know I was looking for them there, but I could actually see some of those individual little subtle movements very easily creeping into people's body language without them even knowing it.
Yes.
And
just imagine this one that I'll give you, Alan.
Okay.
You see what I'm doing?
Yeah. I see you're looking at the cell phone and you're not looking at me, and you're just kind of enjoying the phone. And
it's only a flip phone. It's not even a good smartphone that I'm looking at.
Ed, I was actually going to say something about that. So is that your phone, really?
Unfortunately, yes.
It is, really? I'm
Yes,
actually
my daughter just can't believe I still have a flip phone.
I'm actually kind of proud of you for that. So that's actually, it's kind of in a hip retro thing there. So flip phone, not bad. But yeah, you were sitting there looking at the phone instead of looking at me. And of course, we're having a dialogue, a conversation. Unfortunately, Ed, I got to tell you, I mean, this is something I think is only going to get worse before it gets better. I think even outside of a professional work environment, I mean, out with families, out with friends, I mean, this just happens. And, I actually have seen some people when they make a pact that when they go out to dinner as a family or as a group of friends, they all have to put their cell phones in the middle of the table, like in a bowl or something.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And they're not allowed to touch it unless there's an absolute emergency, like ringing on it. Otherwise, it stays in that bowl. And it's tough, but I do think that's good to see people doing that. But
I totally agree. And just to get focused on the person you're physically with, as opposed to get focused on this thing in the hand, it's amazing how much that can help you to overcome any kind of perception of rudeness.
And the thing is, and I see this a lot even with my children. I've got a 13-year-old at home, and he is absolutely convinced that he can multitask extremely well. And one of the ways he tries to prove that he can multitask is he will have his little iPad and he will be fishing around on it while I'm talking, and I realize he's watching something else, and I immediately have to stop him and say, Alex, I'm talking to you right now. He's like, well, Dad, I hear every word you're saying. I'm like, okay, I know that maybe you do. Maybe you do have the brain capacity where you can process two streams of information at the same time. It's like, but I don't feel like that's the case, and I feel like you're not listening to me. So again, It's that perception. Whether or not he's hearing what I say, the perception is that he's not. So
yes, yeah, that's a great example, and it's one of those things where maybe he's hearing, or maybe that employee is hearing, but are they truly listening, and are they conveying that they're listening? That's so much of what customer service is all about. It's not just I care or I communicate, but it's, am I intentionally trying to convey that I care? Am I intentionally trying to convey that I'm connecting with you, wanting to communicate with you? It's that intentional to convey that to the customer.
On a little bit of a side related topic with that, I'm actually amazed. Both of my boys, they have a video game system at the house that they have time to play every once in a while. And they also have their little thing that they can watch videos on when they go travel or anything. Oh, okay. My boys have actually gotten to the point where they're sitting there with the little videos, watching videos on headphones in their lap while they're playing a video game on the TV set. And it's happening at the same time. And I honestly don't understand how that's happening. So maybe they have trained themselves to follow these multiple streams at one time. But again, it's all about how the other person's perceiving it. And that's what I've been trying to teach them all along with that. So good point.
Right. And there's a difference between having two streams that you're interacting with and having one of those streams be a person.
Yes. Good point. Very good point.
Yes. So maybe from their perspective, they can interact with two devices and the device doesn't care if they're paying attention to them.
Right, yes.
But when one of those, quote, devices is a person, that person does care. And they, not necessarily your children, but just people in general need to realize people want to be a priority over technology when they're interacting with each other.
No, you're so right on that. So right, yeah.
The last area where you can really do something personally to try to overcome any perception of rudeness is these 4 key ideas, and I'll just say them over and over again in business, but don't rush the customer. I mean, this is by far the most frequent cause of perceived rudeness. Even when customers are dealing with a kind customer service representative, if they perceive that employee is trying to rush them through the conversation, or if that employee is talking too quickly, or that employee is just giving one-word answers to try to reduce their handle time on the call in the call center, or that employee is interrupting the person, or that employee is saying thank you, goodbye without confirming that the customer got their needs met, all those are drivers of a perception of a rude employee.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely see that. And actually, that's going to tie into my story here in a moment, my story of the month to share. Because you're right. I think when we feel rushed, when we feel like we're being quickened or kind of moved along faster pace than we really want to, that's a huge source of rudeness. That's when I actually use the word probably more than anything else. It's not always the body language for me as much as it is did they really just kind of push me along and not really take the time to trying to understand what I'm needing or trying to figure out my needs. So
Exactly. That's where you go from what you should feel, which is that you're important to the company, to what you do feel, which is like you're a cog on the assembly line.
Yes.
They're just trying to move you through the assembly line, and you just happen to be a person instead of a widget. And when you have that feeling you're just a widget to them, you don't matter to them, then you can be perceived as being rude.
You know, Ed, that's actually one of the main reasons why I do not like going to like J&S cafeteria or some of these other cafeteria food places, because you get in that line and you feel like you're moving down the assembly line, and I've got to make quick decisions on what food do I want, and I've got to point to it, and I got to tell them right there, and if I've moved past it, I can't go back to it. And it's nothing against the people there. It's just that format. It just is meant for, you have to keep moving along. You can't stay here for 2 minutes staring at the food, deciding what you want to eat. You got to point and tell us what you want right now. And every time I come away from there, it doesn't matter how nice the people behind the counter are. I don't feel very happy. So
Yeah, and so much of return business, so much perception is how you end up feeling at the end of that interaction, the end of that transaction. And if you're dealing with somebody you perceive as rude for a lot of these different reasons, then you're going to come away feeling negatively, and that's where the company loses the money. They have to spend excessive time like the employee does, and the employee could put themselves at risk professionally.
So there's just way too many dangers in letting this perception of rudeness continue. And although some people are resistant to feeling like they shouldn't have to change their body language or shouldn't have to mind their tone of voice or any of that, the fact of the matter is the dangers that could come about by not monitoring this are so great that we really need to make sure we're focused on it. So all the steps you mentioned, we're talking about some tone of voice and the style of language you use. I love the one about not using the word you when talking about blame on a situation, talking about empathy. We're talking about even a tactical thing of making sure that we don't just push people into a hold or transfer position on the telephone. The body language, how we look. And again, that's another one where it may be a little more awkward to get a videotape of yourself interacting with somebody, but if there's some way to get some feedback from somebody else on the body language you're giving, it's sometimes hard for us to see it in ourselves. And then, yes, this last one, which will lead right into my story in a moment, about rushing the customer and making the customer feel like they're kind of being pushed through a process instead of really being cared for as an individual. So, good. Yeah. A lot of good tactics. These are all things we can all do. Even if we're not being perceived as rude, these are still things we need to keep check on and improving and doing to make sure we never run that risk of somebody feeling that way about us. So,
great summary.
Yeah. Ed, that's some great tips and really good actionable tips too, I think, that people can use. Good. So I think we have tackled the topic of rudeness. I think we understand it. We have a little more sense of it. And we have a little more sense of what to do to help fix it, that perception going forward. Now, Ed, we always wrap up our show with kind of a story of the month, a customer service story of the month, one each for you and I that we have encountered over the last 30 days since we were last together, something we want to share with the audience that it could be a good story to use as a model, could be one that didn't go so well that we want to use as a word of warning. Mine is negative. So is yours positive by chance?
I wish it was. Usually I do have positive ones. Yeah. This one's negative as well this week. Well,
let me hit mine first just because it ties right in with that last tactic measure that we just talked about. It's actually kind of perfect how it blends into that. So my studio recorder engineer today, Chris, and I, we have a film society. We've talked about it on the show before that we hold in our area. And we have a film festival coming up in 2 weeks that we're really excited about. It's going to be a weekend-long film festival. So we've been spending our free time working on that the last few nights. And I had to go get something done or made for the festival coming up at a local shop. And I'm being very generic here because we are in a relatively small town. And I don't want to get too specific with it. But, a lot of people when they're hearing about this film festival are getting pretty excited about the idea. They really think this is a cool thing for this area. It's the first one that's ever happened in this area, this county. And so I was describing the festival to this person behind a counter and explaining what I needed to help us do this festival. And this person, she was one of the nicest people behind the counter. So pleasant and so just energetic.
Oh, good.
However,
bad.
when you get to be so energetic and you're liking what the customer's telling you, you're excited, you've got ideas, you're kind of all that. She became so fast talking and interrupting of me to where I did not finish a sentence the whole rest of the dialogue we had. It was kind of where we were thinking about, she's like, oh, yeah, you could do this, this, and this. And it's like, no, actually, I was going to say something else. But, and it got to the point where after a while, I kind of got a little worn out. And I just said, you know what? That's fine. Whatever. Just take care of this for us or do this. And I appreciate it. And sure enough, there were things wrong with the order because it was one of those things where I think she heard what she heard and she heard what she was saying, but she didn't hear everything I was trying to tell her because she kept cutting me off. And it's frustrating because I loved her enthusiasm. I loved her excitement, and I wouldn't trade that for the world. I think customers really respond to that well. But you got to understand you're still dealing with a customer who has things to say, things to express, and you've got to pace yourself, not overwhelm them, not just pour on that enthusiasm to the point where you really can't hear them or listen to them anymore. And again, she missed some important details because she was getting way ahead of herself. So excitable, so enthusiastic, which are great, but they do have to be kept in some level of check. And realizing that not every customer you work with is going to like the over-the-top enthusiasm all the time either. So there's got to be a balance there as well. But I definitely felt rushed. I felt like I had to quickly get my words in to get to have them be heard. And that it's a shame because she is such a good person and good employee, I'm sure, and so excited about what she does. It's just a shame that it affected me negatively like it did. So it's a good reminder to all you really energetic, excitable people out there that you still have to keep that in check sometimes.
Yeah, that's real interesting because it's the type of person it sounds like that could use some coaching, some good management advice and guidance and that sort of thing. They have the right attitude. They just need to learn how to channel it, when to rein it in, and how to make sure they get a few things down, like the patience, like confirming you understand the customer's needs before you jump to a solution. I mean, it sounds like it's a person with a lot of potential. It's just got to be, just like anybody, there has to be a little bit of wisdom applied to it from others who really know how do you use that strength and not let it become a weakness for you in interactions with customers.
And the thing is, if I was given a chance with an employee to err in favor of having them be excited and passionate and energetic towards it, and knowing I just had to polish up these little rough edges, that's a much better situation than the other way around. It's hard to teach enthusiasm to an employee. It's much easier to teach them how to slow down a little bit, let clients finish their sentences and thoughts. I mean, that's a much more trainable, teachable thing. So, good.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have one person I'm working with. He's a young but very professional person. He's so conscientious about wanting to do a good job. And at the end of meetings, he will ask for feedback. But instead of asking for feedback, which I strongly encourage, asking for feedback, saying, please let me know how things went today. If you have any suggestions on how this could be a little bit better next time, happy to hear it. So happy to have you here. What he says instead is, tell me what you're feeling right now about how things went. Did anything really frustrate you? Did anything really tick you off about today? Is there anything that made you think this was just a waste of time? So it's kind of like it's great that he wants feedback, but the way he's asking the questions is he's planting these seeds of negativity in the minds of the folks in the room.
Yeah.
So they could have had a great meeting, but the way he ends it asking for feedback, he's trying to get them to think of every little negative thought they can think of. And that's what he's wanting for feedback. So it's just interesting if somebody with a lot of talent, very professional, wants the feedback, but just like with your example of somebody with enthusiasm, you have to make sure that they learn how to get the feedback, but do it in such a way that it's not going to, for whatever reason, end up putting people's minds down a negative path unnecessarily.
That's a really good point. I think I know a couple of people that have a very similar trait like that as well. So it's great to have the enthusiasm. We just got to keep it in check and make sure it doesn't taint the experience overall. So. Great. Well, what's your story?
Well, this is a business-oriented story. One of my websites was having an issue. It's a WordPress site, and all of a sudden I couldn't log on to the site.
Oh, right.
So I called up their tech service. I explained the situation. They immediately and enthusiastically said, I can help you with that. And I was like, oh, thank goodness.
Good.
Because it's frustrating not to be able to go in and log in and be able to edit your website. But after a couple of minutes of them asking me questions and that sort of thing, I realized that all they were doing was talking about different functions that were on an online control panel for the website that I was already very familiar with. So I tried to explain to them, I'm already familiar with this control panel. I understand what it's doing, but I want to figure out how to get to the login screen. I can't get to the login screen for WordPress. Oh, and at that point, they said, well, you just have to reinstall WordPress. You'll have to go find a particular FTP program. We don't recommend any, but just go find a classic FTP program and upload WordPress. By the way, we don't back up any of your files, so if it doesn't work, then, it's just not going to work. What's that?
Sorry.
I'm sorry. So in the end, they couldn't help. So what bothered me the most out of the whole conversation was I explained exactly what I needed up front. And when you get an employee saying, oh, I can definitely help you with that, the employee is setting an expectation.
Yeah.
And they obviously heard the word WordPress, know that they have some kind of a function that they do to address WordPress issues without really hearing specifically what my issue is. And as soon as they said, I can definitely help you with that, my hopes got up. And then immediately I realized, well, not immediately, after about 2 or 3 minutes, I started to realize that my hopes were coming down.
Yes.
And they were not going to be met. So this is just an example of make sure you're truly listening and identifying the underlying cause for the call, the underlying cause for the particular issue before you enthusiastically say, yes, you can definitely help the customer with that. Because if you can't help the customer and you've promised you could, you have just created a bigger issue than they came to you with.
That's a very good point. And another one of those little tactical things are just in our scripting to make sure we do.
Yes.
Another thing I would point out too, Ed, is it sounded like they had their pre-scripted checklist of if somebody says this word, these are the solutions you point them to. And it's not, unfortunately, with inexpensive customer service on some of these websites, that just seems to be the routine method these days. Unfortunately, they go right to those keywords and right to that scripted answers, which are most of the time not a real good fit for what our needs are.
Yes.
So it's frustrating. It really is. But I hate that you got your hopes raised up so high, and then just because they felt like, well, this solves 90% of the calls I get, I'm sure it'll solve this one too. And very disappointing. Online technical support is a whole. I mean, we've had shows about it and talked about online support. It's a whole different animal, that's for sure.
Yeah. So.
Oh, Ed, thanks so much for the time today. We talked about the word rudeness, and we talked about some tactics to make sure you're not being perceived as being rude. And then we also had our stories of the month, which are always fun to have. Unfortunately, we didn't have any positive stories, but hopefully they were some good messages and lessons you could get from those of things to make sure in your everyday life that you don't run into as well. This has been Stepping Up Service here on themesh.tv. As a reminder, check out our website at themesh.tv to see all the shows, including Stepping Up Service. Go back and listen to old episodes. Drop us a line from the contact form on the site. And by all means, go to iTunes and subscribe to the show if you liked what you heard. And that way you'll ensure that you always get the latest episode whenever it's ready to come out. So Ed Gagnon can be found at Customer Service Solutions, his business, cssamerica.com for your customer service training, culture, process improvement needs. Great organization located in North Carolina, but working with companies all around the world. And then I'm with the Jackson Group. You can learn more about us at thejacksongroup.com. That's THE Jackson Group, all one word, .com. To find out about our survey services, work we do with employee and customer satisfaction surveys. Ed, I hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks. You too, Alan. Appreciate it.
Take care. We'll talk to everybody next time.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.